let me show you what Trump is saying, and what he's had to say has not really meshed up totally or narratively with what the Secretary of State has had to say. But let me play for you what Trump has had to say.
What's the worst case scenario that you have planned for in Iran?
Well, I don't know if there's a worst case. I guess the worst case would be we do this and then somebody takes over who's as bad as the previous person, right? That could happen. We don't want that to happen.
Do you have someone in mind right now? Because you said all the people you did have in mind have been taken out. What do you think?
Well, most of the people we had in mind are dead. So, you know, we had some in mind from that group that is dead. And now we have another group. They may be dead also, based on reports.
Your thoughts about where we are as a military and where the conversation with the country stands right now as being led by Donald Trump?
Well, I mean, this is obviously turning, I think, into a major disaster. But the point that he was making about taking out senior leaders, I mean, I remember very vividly my time in Iraq. You remember the decks of cards that we had with all the bad guys listed, you know, from the ace of spades to the two of clubs, whatever. And how every night we were trying to take out bad guys, senior leaders in the Iraqi military, Al-Qaeda and the like. And I remember the impact on the ground was pretty much negligible, that every time that they killed a bad guy, another one would jump up. These are not stupid people. They've known that this attack was coming for quite some time. We had an 86-year-old Khomeini that was leading this country, who had cancer, and he knew that his days were numbered. They had at least 4 levels, I believe, appointed of a succession plan. So, you know, to think that these people are going to be taken away, or we're going to execute regime change merely by killing off the top 40 or 50 senior leaders in the IRGC, I mean, that's pretty rich to go to that, to make that kind of an argument. These people are smart, they are dug in, they're well equipped, and they're going to hold out for quite some time, despite the fact that they've lost a lot of senior leaders. The military has done a superb job. I'm very, very proud of that. But Donald Trump is taking advantage of their incredible competence and their ability to get the job done, because they've been taught to respond, yes, sir, when a civilian leader gives a command. And they've done it very, very well. But he's been taking what he has essentially done is he's turned America's military into Trump's militia to execute his plan and his, to feed his ego, make him look like the tough guy. This is not going well. It's only going to get worse, and we're only 4 days into this.
Trump's latest public communication about where he will use the military is to deploy the Navy to lead ships through the Straits of Hormuz. What risk does that present to the men and women of the Navy?
Well, a tremendous risk, obviously. I mean, if they're going to go into the Persian Gulf, a very small area in the 21-mile Strait of Hormuz, as we pointed out earlier, I mean, they put themselves at tremendous risk. There are landmines, or there are mines in the sea that have been placed out there. And of course, they do have a Navy. Donald Trump claims that we've degraded quite a bit of it. But there's lots of threats that the Navy will definitely encounter in trying to support the movement of oil through the Strait of Hormuz.
Let me come back to what Marco Rubio has put before the Congress and the country. This public narrative that we went to respond to what would be the response from Iran, knowing that Israel was going to go. It presupposes that we had no sway or no influence over what Israel would do, which, if that is the sworn testimony of Secretary of State, that's shocking in and of itself. But this is where the most dramatic rupture is within Trump's movement since I've known you, since I've laid eyes on you, since we've been having these conversations. And this is a tweet from right-wing influencer, the Daily Wire host Matt Walsh. Quote, So he is flat out telling us we are in a war with Iran because Israel forced our hand. This is basically the worst possible thing he could have said.
Yeah, that's an important point to consider, because one of the things that Rubio did is that there was a bunch of people that were tepid, but they were still saying, look, I'm not sure I'm here, but they're not full-throated attacking Trump or the Trump administration like Walsh. When he said that, he basically kicked a hornet's nest, because this has been a major fault line in the larger MAGA coalition for a while. That big dust-up back in October between Nick Fuentes and the Heritage Foundation that created that pile-on where all these right-wingers then started picking a side, where J.D. Vance had to essentially say, no, we're going to let the Groypers in, because he couldn't say no, we're not going to let them out. It was all because of this. How much power and influence do we actually want Israel to have over our politics? And then separate from that, how much tolerance are we going to have for the mere perception of that narrative thread? And what Rubio said is he confirmed for a large part of the MAGA coalition something that they've been saying for a while, the Alex Joneses of the world, the Nick Fuenteses, the Matt Walshes, that actually this is all about Israel, and that Trump did not have his hand on the wheel. The sort of the strong man that you've been fully supporting and carrying all this water for, backfilling all the lies for, he wasn't the one that made this decision. We are now doing it for someone else. And that opened up a massive fault line. And they had been percolating beforehand. There was already tension, but that was the difference maker. And there's no way to walk that back. He can claim that wasn't what he was saying. It's too late, because there was a perception that was percolating, a feeling. They had been soaking in that narrative for such a long time. That is where the growth has been in the MAGA media, has actually been around that thread. The reason that the Groypers and these other figures have so much influence is because they always tie everything back to that. Candace Owens ties everything back to that. And so that is the major sort of theme. And, they're America first is what they say they are, but at the core, they're isolationists. And this fear, it not only fuels anti-Semitism and feeds into that, but it also runs against their isolationist tendencies. So what Rubio did was not just validate and confirm, and for them, one of their biggest fears, but he basically said, this is now the fight. This is actually what this fight's about. And so now he's calling the question as to whether or not that they're going to tolerate Trump being as closely aligned with Israel as he's been.
I mean, Mark Mazzetti, this it is such a shock to the system, I think, for Americans to hear that we have launched a war against Iran with sort of a paragraph from the wildly unpopular doctrine of preemption from the Bush era, of which I worked in that administration, but only to follow and be led by Israel's foreign policy decisions. Is it true that did we have any capacity to influence or weigh in with Israel? I mean, just tell me, with all of your knowledge of the U.S.-Israeli relationship, where does that relationship stand? And is it, as Rubio describes, they were doing this with or without our approval or our buy-in, and so we had to strike Iran at the same time to what? I mean, just fill in the blanks of what Rubio has said publicly so I understand.
So we did a story that published yesterday that got into basically what led Trump to war. And it kept coming back to Benjamin Netanyahu, where if you go back to late December, Netanyahu makes a visit to Mar-a-Lago. And during that meeting, he kind of plants the seed of an idea of that Israel was probably going to have to strike Iran sometime in the first half of 2026. He would like American support. He would like protection. But Netanyahu was basically saying, we're going to need to do this. And over the weeks that followed, as Trump was taking this sort of circuitous path, is he going to protect the protesters? Is he going to knock out the nuclear program? Throughout, or cut a deal, right? Throughout, behind the scenes, there was this push increasingly by Netanyahu that led to what we now see, which is a joint U.S.-Israeli military operation. And Trump was not getting any advice of his own advisors against doing this, but he was getting strong advice from Netanyahu that he needed to be part of that. So Netanyahu kind of filled the vacuum there. And the one other thing I think it's important to say is that Trump came off the operation in Venezuela in early January quite confident about how quick and easy U.S. military force can be. and I think got into the idea that, well, maybe something as clean as Venezuela can be done in Iran. So it's these combination of forces that kind of led us to where we are right now.